Hi, Etwell. Welcome to week 2 of A-Level History. Thank you very much for all of your contributions to the work from week 1. Your responses were really thoughtful, really insightful, really poignant, really thought-provoking. I was really impressed with how well you all engaged with that text. I think it gave me a lot of hope in terms of how you guys will engage with this course and with history generally. And yeah, we just look forward to more of that in the coming weeks. So this week we have a bit of a different format for you. So we have this video with myself, Mrs. Anna Nakwa, also with, I'll let everyone introduce themselves. So who else do we have here?
Miss McComb.
I'm Miss Michael.
I'm Giovanna.
And I'm Heaven.
So
We're former Year 13 students.
We've invited them along because we thought it would be really good to model what an A-level classroom looks like, and we thought that they would be able to contribute to the discussion because, like you, they've never learned this topic before. So we thought it would be a good way to demonstrate to you what dialogue in an A-level classroom looks like.
So let's get started. I think, if we were in the classroom, we would probably start like this, given the week that we've seen globally. So I just wanted to just ask everyone what they've kind of engaged with, either online or just generally, in terms of the global human rights struggle that's happening right now.
I think that we're currently living through a time that will be in history books in the future. I think it's really reminiscent of the 1960s when we saw the counterculture begin to rise. I think it's a time where revolution is brewing, social revolution and also mental revolution, as people are beginning to accept different way of thinking. They're thinking outside of their comfort zone. They're challenging the status quo. So I think it's been a few weeks where history is in the making. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. I think that point about the mental revolution as well, I think that's definitely happening on a scale that I've never experienced in my lifetime before. So I think, that's such an important aspect of this, that this is literally about consciousness raising and the mental revolution in that respect. Heaven, what do you think? What have you seen? How are you processing this moment?
I mean, personally, I've been feeling a lot of different things recently as a result of what's been going on. I think seeing like images of innocent Black people or innocent people having their lives taken from them is like, it's bound to put a strain on anyone with any ounce of empathy in them. So yeah, it's been a difficult week, I would say.
I guess what I also wanted to ask everyone, so Miss Michael and Miss McComb, as sort of history teachers and history students and just general people who have a passion for understanding the past, how have you made sense of this moment in terms of your historical understanding, particularly of how it's resonated so much in the UK?
I think it's been powerful, especially the acknowledgement that race is such a huge issue here in the UK as well, because for so many years it has been a case where people have placed the blame on America, not that America shouldn't have, so like their racist antics should be recognised, but the UK's hasn't. And I think now people in the UK are actually starting to take a stance and starting to realise just how systematically racist the UK is and how embedded it is into our institutions. So the idea that Black Lives Matter is no longer just a strand in America, it is globally, it is on our doorsteps. And so I think now more than ever, there needs to be an education of Black British history. We need to get that more into the curriculum for people to understand that it's not just an issue across the Atlantic, it hits home here as well.
And I think that's something that I found quite interesting as well. Like, just straight away, the response was in solidarity with what was happening in America, but this is also a British problem as well. And, we're still in the wake of the Windrush scandal that's all going on right now, and that just shows the systematic racism that we have in the UK, although it's not brought to the forefront in the same way that is in America. We're much more covert with racism here. I think that's good that that's being talked about a lot more, although interesting that Boris Johnson's decided to say he understands why people are upset with what happened in America, but he's not acknowledging the fact that they're calling for justice for British racism and an end to British racism too. So I think that's interesting. I also think the language around this is really interesting too. Like I'm seeing a lot of people commenting on this quite strongly who I wouldn't usually see do that, and using terms like anti-racist, and it seems at least there's a common understanding about what it means to be an anti-racist, and hopefully that's something that's long-lasting, although maybe
I think, yeah, that point that you made about language is really interesting, and I guess the semantics around Britain and race is changing, even to the point where you had Matt Hancock talking in Parliament this week saying Black Lives Matter. Now, on the one hand, that was sickening, right? That phrase would be co-opted by someone who I would bet a large percentage of my few assets that I own that he doesn't fully understand the context of the I guess it is a Black Power movement or the Black Lives Matter movement. But the fact that phrase that was once so ubiquitous and just so subversive almost is even now being co-opted by the liberal media and the liberal establishment. So I think, one, it does give legitimacy to the Black Lives Matter struggle as a genuine human rights movement. But I think in the UK we've got a long way to go in terms of actually recognizing the pervasive ways in which racism exists and has existed in British culture, society, in every kind of institution for the last 400 plus years as well. One thing I'd ask Heaven and Giovanna is, so on the A-level course, we studied America and we focused a lot on America and its struggles with race and racism historically. So maybe as we were learning that course, did you ever make any connections with the UK, or did you see it as something that was transatlantic in its nature, or did it resonate as young people in the UK learning about America's struggles with racism?
I don't think, me personally, when studying it, I don't think I could see any like literal direct links, but I think that was probably due to the fact that like whenever I was studying history, I never really learned about British racism like specifically, so I wasn't able to pick out like key events that were similar. But then when you look at like everyday experience for the average African American, you can see similarities being a Black British person living in London, and you can see similarities when you look around the Black community in London.
When we were learning about it, like Heaven said, we didn't really know that much about racism in Britain. I don't think it was in our minds when we were learning about racism in America. And so that definitely did restrict us in understanding the systemic racism in Britain. But I think now that we've spent a lot of time researching, reading news articles, reading about what's going on in our own communities, I think our eyes have opened a lot to how, like Heaven said, the experiences are the same. And if you look at the people that are in power in both nations, Donald Trump right now and Boris Johnson, you can clearly see a correlation in their ideas and the way they speak, and the way they speak about Black people and ethnic minorities. I think learning about the civil rights movement in America, and learning about the presidents at that time and the prime ministers that were in power at the same time, you can also see a correlation of politics. But I think we've only started to realize that towards the middle end of year 13, when we've really we're a lot more conscious of things around us and injustices than we were when we started learning about civil rights in America.
I was just going to add, like, I think a lot of it was due to the fact, like Giovanna just said, that when we first started learning about American racism, we were at a completely different level of like understanding of the world compared to now. So I think during the time that we learned about American racism, we became a lot more conscious. And so now we're at a position that allows us to actually understand the racism, the covert racism that's in Britain, because it's not easy to find. Well, it's not easy to see most of the time. It's very hidden, and like that makes it that much harder to unveil.
And we can now start make those to make those correlations between the two.
Yeah, exactly.
Would you say learning about apartheid in South Africa and maybe even Irish nationalist struggles has helped kind of develop your conceptual understanding of like the forces of racism in terms of class, capitalism, culture, all of those kind of universal themes? Do you think those things in the A-level maybe help you connect with this moment in a different way?
For me, I've been taught whitewashed history for my whole life. And so if I'm being honest, I didn't know about apartheid before year 12. I heard the name Nelson Mandela, but I only really knew who he was after he died. And so that is quite embarrassing to say. I mean, I know it's not completely my fault because of the education system that we have and with whitewashed history, but I think learning about apartheid, you really learn about the extent of racism and how it's part of our social fabric, and it's something that we can't ignore. So when people say we live in a post-racial society, I don't know how they can think that with the fact that there's still economic apartheid in South Africa till this day. And so, yeah, and even learn about the Irish nationalist struggle, we learn about how there are systems that have been built and have been protected for generations to kill these people off, to kill people of ethnic minorities, to kill people that pose a threat to the system, to the European white system.
Learning about apartheid, I think, was crucial in us becoming the conscious people that we are now. I think seeing the extent that people went to just to preserve this superficial idea of nationality and national pride, I think seeing what's left of apartheid in contemporary society gives us like a really good understanding of like the legacy that slavery also left behind, and the way that it continues to put Black people at a disadvantage as soon as they're like from the moment that they're born. And with learning about Irish nationalism, we learned that like race isn't the only thing that divides people. Unfortunately, you have so many other barriers, religion being one of them, as we learn.
And I think a lot of our political inspirations have come from learning of apartheid and learning a wider curriculum of the civil rights movement, because we're so thankful that it wasn't taught in just the Martin Luther King narrative. We learned about different thinkers and different people that made an impact on the Black freedom struggle. So I think the way we think right now stemmed from the people that we learned about in history.
Awesome, that's really interesting. Okay, let's move on then and look at, I guess, just talking about race in Britain. So I think one thing that we've kind of seen in Britain is interesting that you said racism in Britain maybe is sometimes covert and not easy to see. But I think maybe that is just like this moment is the tipping point of that in recent history, actually, we've seen quite a few clear examples of the way in which Britain functions as a racist society. And so what we'll do is we'll watch this clip. It's from December 2019, just a few months ago, and it's a clip of a racist insult being thrown at a football player and the conversation between football pundits on Sky Sports News that follows after that. So let's watch this clip and just think about how that moment connects almost with this moment too.
You heard there. Just how disappointing is this?
Majorly.
It's incident after incident after incident.
Yeah, we think we've moved forward, but there's always, whether it's just a village idiot or whether it's because they're full of drink. And for me, it has to be self-regulating. I think someone in the immediate area has to get a steward over, appoint them out, get them ejected, and never be allowed back in the stadium. It has to come from the good guys that are here. The vast majority of the 60,000 are not racist. They would hate to be standing next to someone like that. And if it happens, point them out and get them evicted at the stadium and get them banned for life. Simple as.
Incident that the language as well that we're using in these protocols, racist behaviour is interfering with the game. If you're Antonio Rudiger in that situation, Ashley, how are you supposed to concentrate on the football when you're hearing that kind of taunt?
Yeah, I'm, probably a person who's had a lot of abuse from the stands at times, and you do try to block it out, but...
Okay, so one thing that really stands out to me now, especially in this moment, is the way in which he frames the incident, the racist incident. Did you guys pick up on how he rationalized what happened?
The news reporter, man.
Yeah.
I picked out of like 3 phrases from what he said. Like first he said what he thought he heard, and then he said, "Oh, just pick it up and move on." And then he said, "Oh, maybe because he was full of drink." So you can tell there was that underlying tone of trying to excuse the behavior and trying to just put it aside rather than actually talking about it and discussing why this was happening.
Yeah, definitely. Heaven, did you pick out anything or something similar?
I just picked up the same things. But yeah, again, just exactly how Giovanna said this, just that like typical culture of just brushing racist things like microaggressions under the rug, which is completely unacceptable, as we know. But it's the stuff like this that kind of just exacerbates this whole covert racist culture in the UK.
And even the way he individualizes it, right? That it's just one person, and if we ban him and get him out of the stadium, then it doesn't ever happen again. And it's the person that is the problem rather than the structure and the, I guess, like racism with a big R, like looking at the actual micro and macro nature of racism rather than just one bad apple kind of thing. I think maybe if we go back a little bit, and I think if we focus on the next part in terms of Ashley Cole's response to Graham Souness's reflections and the question he's asked, I want us to really focus on how Ashley Cole responds to the question, both verbally and physically in his body language as well. What do we make of this as a Black footballer who also has suffered these indignities?
With the game, if you're Antonio Rudiger in that situation, Ashley, how are you supposed to concentrate on the football when you're hearing that kind of taunt?
Yeah, I'm, probably a person who's had a lot of abuse from the stands at times, and you do try to block it out, but obviously he's heard something, and yeah, as you mentioned, the referee, but the players keep going to the referees, and we keep seeing the same things being done. As Graham mentioned, it's about education. Do these people need educating? We're in a society now where, it's easy to say what you want on social media. You don't see their faces. And is there a way to find out who actually is doing it in the stands? The only way is, as Graham mentioned, is the people around them, grassing them up, complaining, getting them thrown out and banned, because I don't see a different way. I don't know the answer, and no one knows the answer, because, as Graham mentioned as well, people drinking the whole day, come to the game, maybe they're not racist, they have that one moment of just want to be cocky in front of their friends, and it's done. I don't understand how you can stop it, to be honest. I really don't.
What do you think about his reaction then, what he's saying?
I think that was kind of sad to watch, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just the way that he was like moving, like his body language, he seemed very uncomfortable. He seemed like he wasn't sure how to approach it, and he began to approach it in a way that we would approach it, through the lens of like educating people, trying to like make it known that this is wrong. And then he kind of just started to drift back and agree with what the guy before him said. It's hard, and I feel bad for him.
Why do you feel bad for him?
Because it's clear that he knows that it's wrong. It's clear that he knows that change needs to happen, but he's uncomfortable, and like he doesn't feel that I don't think he feels he's valid in what he's saying. I don't think he feels that him being hurt by the stuff that's happening is valid. which is awful because it is completely valid.
Yeah, totally. Imagine just occupying that space. You know, you're a successful, accomplished professional footballer, yet you're having to justify your pain, and just like you said, you can physically see him like contorting at the reality of that, and he does become uncomfortable with talking about it as well, because he knows in that space ultimately he doesn't have any power as a black voice. Ultimately,
A lot said to me, and
In English football, or
yeah, it's just my job is to play football. I'm paid to play football. I love the game football, so I would rather show them in a different way and play football.
to be fair, this has happened to you in English grounds. I mean,
I'm not
public
going to
one
say
in Madrid.
start drama again, but of course it's happened. But
So what's interesting about that interaction just then between Ashley Cole and the pundit?
I mean, he repeated the question on
What
English ground, as if he was making it up, like he didn't believe his word.
Why not? Why doesn't he think that this is something that could happen in England?
Because he doesn't think racism exists in England. I mean, it's that whole notion that the UK is innocent, and people are blindsided by that, and people are taught that as well.
Yeah, racism is a foreign problem. It's not a British problem.
Yeah.
And what did Ashley Cole say?
I don't want to start drama as if it's something futile, but it's not. It's a whole system that's put up against them.
And what would that drama look like?
A revolution?
Yeah, it's almost like, I'm not trying to start a revolution, but it's true.
So when a black footballer or a black celebrity speaks out and says that there's a race problem in this country, so we've seen that actually very recently with quite a high-profile artist, what happens? Get blacklisted? Well, what happened when Stormzy did it last year?
I mean, his word was completely discredited. His name was dragged through the mud, told to stay in his lane, focus on his music, not be too political.
And I think that's the key point, is how we've depoliticized racism as if it's just a normal thing that happens in the background, and once you get to a certain socioeconomic status, it should no longer bother you or be your problem, or it's no longer of any political relevance to your life. And I think, you know, like you said earlier on, Heaven, in this moment, I just empathize with Ashley Cole and the way in which he has to play down the significance and the magnitude of racism in order to make his white counterparts feel a bit more comfortable and put them at ease.
I think as well, the way that he says that he's just there to play football, like he doesn't want to get involved in the supposed political discussion about race. It's literally just, I'm here to play football, so I would ignore what was going on. And I think it draws to what he was saying before about how many times players have gone up to referees and complained and nothing's been done. So it's as if Ashley Cole feels as, you know, all he can do now is just be a footballer. He can't discuss race, because once he has discussed race, it's been thrown back in his face, as it has been for many others, as you're saying. So,
and that's almost like a way of weaponizing white supremacy in a way, to silence you when you definitely feel and know you have a legitimate grievance, but it's trivialized and downplayed and not dealt with appropriately.
Let's carry on and maybe contrast Ashley Cole's response with Gary Neville's response. And just a little bit of context, if you don't know who Gary Neville is, he is also a pundit on the Sky Sports news channel, but significantly, Gary Neville is, you know, he's like a football icon. He played for Manchester United, had an extremely successful career at the time of like David Beckham, and also played and I think captained England as well through the early 2000s and like late 90s.
Well, I mean, we're dealing with it. We're talking about there on a micro level about an individual behind the goal, but it's far more deep than that, in the sense that ultimately Ashley was abused in the Burn about 15 years ago in a game that I played in. And I sat in the dressing room at the end of that game and probably didn't even give it a moment's thought, really, in the sense that we're thinking of it as football players, aren't they? You sat there in the changing room and you ultimately hear about it. There's a media storm. The English media are calling for UEFA, for FIFA, for Spanish authorities to deal with it. Similarly recently with Bulgaria. But we have a racism problem in the Premier League in England, and the Premier League have got to stand up. They hide behind the FA, the Premier League,
on this issue. They hide behind the FA, in my opinion. They pushed the disciplinary issues and other issues over to the FA. Yes, we heard the announcements at the end, but I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, we've just seen a general election in this country where both main parties and the leaders of both main parties are accused constantly over the last month of fueling racism and accepting racism within their parties. So if it's accepted in the highest office in the country, we're not talking about it at a micro level, we're talking about it at an absolute enormous level, the highest office in the country. And it's the same here today. We've seen an incident, to be fair, which we could call is down to one individual person. It's a far bigger problem than that. I think there has to be something that happens quickly. And I think ultimately, I said on the thing, I think we maybe have to empower the players to walk off the pitch and stop the entertainment whilst it's happening. Because that's the only way in which I can see it. I'm not, because ultimately, I didn't walk off the pitch when Ashley was abused 15 years ago. And ultimately, you might argue that, it's now okay for me to sit here in my sort of ivory tower of a commentary box and suggest that players should walk off the pitch. But I think ultimately I would be ashamed of myself for not doing 15 years ago, and as I would be absolutely proud of players now to empower them to think, do something about it, take it into your own hands. The PFA have got to act, because ultimately the PFA are there to protect football players in this country, and football players in this country are receiving abuse whilst they're playing football and doing their jobs. That is unacceptable. So PFA might have to take it into their own hands if the Premier League and FA, and stop pointing the finger towards the Bulgarian FA and the Spanish FA, because we have to deal with our own shit here.
I am compelled to say they are the opinions of you, Gary Neville, and not those of Sky Sports. That is my duty. But do you not agree with it, Dave? Well, whether I do or I don't is completely irrelevant. It's fine. I'm here to try and hold a balanced debate. What about what Gary says?
It was balanced. I wasn't accusing anybody of racism, but it was pretty balanced.
Okay. I think it's a minority. What disturbs me, it's a minority. Obviously, it's a minority. But
so much to unpack from that.
Wow.
What do you guys think?
Do you want to start, Heaven?
I'm kind of at a loss for words.
Yeah.
I did not expect that.
What did you expect?
I don't know their names. I'm sorry. The last guy that
Gary
said,
Neville.
No, the one that was
The anchor.
The Sky
Yes.
Sports, yeah.
Yeah, him. I didn't expect that to come out his mouth or anything
Very
on that level. Yeah, very defensive.
It's interesting how. Sorry, I haven't.
No, go.
I was going to say, it was interesting how he didn't say that, these are not the views of Sky Sports, when you had, and his was quite a moderate sort of, not passive, but it was passive in a way and not reactionary. Whereas when Gary Neville said it, it was, oh, no, this is not the viewpoint of Sky Sports. So one being more acceptable because of the way it was said.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
And there was someone in his ear saying, shut him up, right? Because we just don't talk about those things in Britain, do we? If we talk about it if it's happening in Spain, we'll talk about it if it's happening in Bulgaria in a football match and defend our black British football players then, but not if English people do it in England. That's a different thing altogether, isn't it? So what did you think about what Gary Neville was saying, though?
You made some really good points.
Yeah, I mean, it was the response that was needed, I guess, that really unpicked the issue. But then it's really scary and dangerous because it plays into the narrative of the white savior kind of, and the fact that a white voice legitimizes what he was meant to say. And I think the issue is that Ashley Cole, he didn't feel his voice was empowered enough for him to say what he really wanted to say. Because we can obviously tell he's uncomfortable and he wanted to say more, but he like what we were talking about earlier, being afraid of being political about the issue. But then Gary, I mean, he voiced what Ashley, I don't want to say should have said, he should have said, but didn't feel like he could say. But then it's also that idea that if the white voice says it, then it's okay.
We also have to take into account that when the white man says something that's outside the status quo, he's not going to be reprimanded nearly as much as if someone else, as someone else that were to say something outside the status quo.
So no, that's literally exactly what I was going to say, Heaven. And I guess you kind of see the power dynamics at play, but it's also really interesting that even though he is speaking out, he gets pushed back as well. And it's almost like if anybody who kind of speaks out against racism, it's almost like cut, no. And yeah, I think just the way in which the presenter just so vehemently wanted to disassociate himself from the issue of racism, and you know, the point when he says whether or not it's my personal opinion is irrelevant, is just, you know, that has historically been the problem with racism, that it's been able to, people could either say, well, it's fine, it's not, my personal opinion doesn't matter, you know. And I think that is what has led us to this moment where people have for so long just not even turned a blind eye, but literally haven't even bothered to look properly.
I mean,
And then
conversation they don't want to start, because if it starts, then it causes an issue for them.
Exactly. And just in the way that the corporation Sky Sports also wanted to be clear that this was not their perspective, it was the perspective of Gary Neville. And how ironic that we're in this moment now where almost every corporation who wants to protect the integrity of their brand and their standing in the world and their social integrity are probably standing in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. I bet you if you go to Sky Sports right now, they've issued a statement or they've said something, and we go back retrospectively 6 months ago, and they're disassociating themselves from anti-racism. And I think, go on, Heaven, sorry.
I mean, I think I was just going to say that you also there are always a lot of different things to take into account when we look at stuff like this. So like right now, I think the climate is completely different to that of 6 months ago, in the sense that right now I feel like it's much more of a trend to stand in solidarity with people that are being oppressed. It's much more, this activism like trend is like really widespread right now. So a lot of, while Sky Sports probably has released a statement, it's most probably not genuine, and they most probably haven't done anything tangible to contribute to the struggle. So
yeah,
definitely. I mean, if you go on their Instagram now, Black Lives Matters all over their page.
Wow.
Yeah, all over their page.
So crazy. And I think, you know, what I think someone else talked about, I think it's Abigail who talked about performative activism. And I think we have to be very wary right now and remember that that was also a tactic. If you think about, when we think about the civil rights movement post the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the passage of the Voting Rights Act, how there was this performativity of equality in American politics, and it looked like the establishment were listening, but underneath it, nothing had fundamentally shifted, nothing had fundamentally changed. So I think what is really powerful about this moment is that people are realizing that without that level of accountability and action, that words are not enough anymore, that people are actually demanding action rather than just sympathy and empathy and platitudes.
And thinking as well about what Gary Neville said as well, I don't know if he was quite white saviour in it. I think that might be a bit harsh on him, because I think what I liked about what he said was his moment of reflection as well, and his understanding that his action 15 years ago was part of the problem, and that, you know, racism isn't just a problem for Black people, it's everybody's problem, and we all have to stand together in solidarity to combat it. But I think you're right, there's that fine line between white ally and white saviour. And then
I don't think he was trying to be it, but if you look from the outside and you compare it to Ashley Cole, then there's definitely that the idea comes out of it, which I think is dangerous. Because I don't think he was voicing what should have been voiced, and he was given all the right facts. But yeah, the fact that when you compare it to the person of color that was beside him, it brings out that idea.
It does, yeah, it does, and it shows how disempowered Ashley Cole was compared to
definitely,
and like you said, Gary Neville had nothing to lose from doing that. Ashley Cole would be completely slandered if he didn't.
To be fair, again, I think, you know, I have to applaud Gary Neville's sort of allyship there. I think that was a really powerful example of how people who have been empowered by race and privileged by race need to use their privilege to speak up on the behalf of people who've been disempowered by race. And, you know, I thought, okay, let me just check if Gary Neville's been consistent. And if you go onto his Twitter feed, is fire. Like,
Wow.
I'm just like, Gary, that's my brother. Like, Gary Neville is my bro. Like, you can tell, like, he's done the work, he's doing the work.
Yeah.
He's not making it about himself, he's being an ally. And I think, as well as the people who we can definitely see are definitely being performative in their activism, we can definitely see the people who have actually come to that moment of self-actualization in their activism as well. And that's really, these two parallels are a really interesting contrast and really important to kind of note. Last week you had a reading from Professor Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and you engaged really well with that text. And you know, I hope some of you might be interested and motivated and inspired to maybe read more of that book. It's widely available, and really interestingly, actually, it's on Amazon last week. It was one of the most bought books. So we can see that people are doing the work and people are wanting to learn more. But his first book was called Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. And I think that is ultimately what is important to think about when we consider race, is that racism is an idea, not a hereditary and terminal disease, and that ultimately there are cures for racist ideas because they're ideas, and we learn ideas, we believe ideas through, you know, being shaped by them and or being empowered by them. So what we thought we'd do this week is just introduce you a little bit more to Professor Kendi. A few months ago, I think last year, he sat down with the journalist Owen Jones.
So Owen Jones is a really good left-wing scholar, actually. So he writes a lot in The Guardian. So you can read his pieces on there and they're really good. He's also written quite a lot of books about class as well. So there's a book called Chavs, which looks at the demonization of the working class in Britain, which is really interesting. And
Establishment
as well, yeah. And he's also a gay man, and he's suffered quite a lot of homophobic abuse because he's been such an avid campaigner, standing up for, you know, people who are marginalized in society, and as a result people have started to target him for hate crime.
So this is a really interesting conversation between these two, and you get to hear in this clip what Professor Kendi explains about the difference between being anti-racist and not being racist, which you actually engaged with a lot in your reading last week, but we thought it'd be interesting for you to hear him speak about it.
Your book's called How to Be an Anti-Racist. So this is a very important point. It's not about being not a racist, but an anti-racist. Do you want to explain, what do you mean by that?
Most people imagine and have been taught to be not racist. That's what they imagine themselves as. That's what society largely is encouraging them to be, not racist. White nationalists across the world self-identify as not racist. White supremacists who mass murder people self-identify as not racist. What the term not racist historically has been a term to say, no matter what idea, racial idea I expressed, no matter what policy I support, I'm still not racist. It has fundamentally been a term of denial. We really asked the question, what does it mean to be not racist? We can't even answer that question because it really, aside from denying that one is racist, the term itself has no meaning. And so when a term has no meaning, we should stop using that term. But a term that does have meaning is anti-racist.
So what's the difference between those two terms then, anti-racist and not racist?
I mean, I guess you can say not being racist is more of a passive term, like you said, a term of denial, like kind of the fact that I don't want to talk about this, I don't want to touch on the subject of racism. But being an anti-racist is when you're outspoken about racism and you're outspoken against it, and like we were talking about earlier, you're an ally to the Black community.
Yeah, I was kind of, when he was talking about it, I was thinking like that the term being non-racist or not racist is kind of used as a response. So like if you're part of a situation, you witness something and you say that you're not racist, you're saying it in response, like Giovanna said, because you're in denial. But to claim being an anti-racist, I think I would go as far to say that it's a way of life, because being anti-racist, having an anti-racist view on the world, you're going to see things a lot differently to a person that's non-racist, because I think when you're anti-racist, you're seeing things for what they truly are.
What do you think people have to do to get to the point of being anti-racist? Maybe if we go forward to the next slide, actually, this kind of connects with the way in which Professor Kende conceptualizes the difference between being racist and anti-racist by diametrically opposing them. And, you know, he's very intentional about not using the phrase not racist, but what do people have to do to get to that point, do you think, personally, before they can become an anti-racist? Because I think that's a really interesting point that you said, Heaven, that it's a way of life. So how do you get to become that, where you embody it in the way that you live your life?
I mean, I think it's similar to the way that you would approach anything, really. You have to start with yourself before looking outside. So you would have to address your own implicit biases, your own implicit, any prejudices that you would have. And yeah, you need to get out of your comfort zone, first of all, because nobody wants to admit that they are prejudiced or that they would subconsciously discriminate against someone. And once you're out of that comfort zone, and once you've acknowledged those faults that you have in yourself, then you can go out to openly advocate against racism, and you can help others get rid of their own implicit biases and move from there.
I think during that process, something that's really crucial is education. And you're seeing a lot of that now. A lot of people recommending films, podcasts, books to read, because it's not easy to be an anti-racist if you don't know about the struggle and you don't know the history of the people and the history of the struggle. So I think education plays a big role in understanding why you have implicit bias and where that came from. Because like you said earlier, Miss, it's not hereditary. It's racism, something that's taught. You're not born a racist. And so you need to understand why you were taught this way, why the people who taught you this think like this, and where the idea stemmed from in order for you to be outspoken against it.
What I really particularly took from Professor Kende is that these identities are not fixed, that in the same way that so you guys haven't read this, but in the introduction of his book, he talks about a racist speech that he gave at his high school graduation, when he kind of denigrated and stereotyped and typecasted and kind of blamed Black young people for the problems of their community ultimately. And he actually got a really positive response when, I'll send it to you, you can read it. It's actually a really interesting take on critical reflection, even as a Black person, in the way in which he has internalized and employed racist ideas. But I think what is really interesting is, and quite new, I think, in terms of like the arena of anti-racism and anti-racism scholarship, is that he talks about racism and anti-racism not being fixed identities, and that actually we're able to do both in the same body, in the same lifetime. We can move from one moment to the next. And yeah, even as a Black woman, I can definitely think of incidents and times when I've thought racist ideas and made decisions from a racist position, but that doesn't make me a permanent racist. And then there have been other times when I've been proactively anti-racist, and I've been proactively trying to combat racism, but that actually these things are fluid. And I think, how do you engage with that idea? What do you think about that idea? What does that mean to you?
I think it directly derives from the basic belief of human nature. Like, I mean, me personally, I believe that human nature is malleable and that you grow and learn because of your experiences, coupled with parts of your DNA, but your environment is what makes you who you are. And so because of that, because you're able to experience different environments, you go through different phases in life, it just shows that you can go from being a racist to an anti-racist, or unfortunately the other way around.
I think as well, it's so interesting how much power it has when you call somebody racist. And even though we live in such an entrenched racist society, it's almost like a massive insult to tell someone that they're racist. And then what that ends up doing is that just shuts the conversation down. It's almost like the whole using the Hitler sort of scenario and saying someone's just like Hitler. It's got that same sort of power that ends any conversation. And I like what he's saying here, because it's about saying your action just then was racist. And I think when people can acknowledge that, that's when there can be growth, and that can be where people move forward rather than just ending that conversation there. I also think like his definition of racist is really interesting too, because it's about what you don't do as well as what you do as well. And there was something that he said in the book which I found quite interesting, and he referenced a Supreme Court justice who said that our constitution is colorblind, and making this idea that the law is blind. But that judge said that when he just passed Plessy versus Ferguson. So this idea then that the law is blind, it's not good enough, is it? So having the status quo, having the neutral, all that does is just protect the white power in the world. So that's not good enough either.
I was just going to say as well that in terms of anti-racist, in order to be a better version of yourself, is recognizing what is classified as being racist. So racist is not always, overt. It can be subtle, it can be small, like microaggressions that happen. And so by allowing those small things to go past, you're allowing racism to continue. So in actuality, you're not actually being an anti-racist, because you're allowing, but sometimes you allow those things to pass. Sometimes you don't even recognize they're happening. So I think part of being an anti-racist is recognizing when something is racist in order for you to do something about it. Because thinking back to, as Sharon was saying, thinking back to when I was younger, there were so many things that happened, but I let slide because I didn't see it as being racist. I just saw it as being normal. And so it's okay to let it slide. So I think it's very important to learn to recognize what racist behavior looks like.
So having, I guess, equipped ourselves with a conceptual understanding about race and racism and connected that with this moment that's happening globally, what we're going to engage in for the next few weeks is this inquiry around the injustices that Black people in Britain have suffered in the 20th century. So this is our inquiry question. How have Black people struggled against injustice in Britain in the 20th century? So we're very intentional about trying to learn about racial injustice in Britain. And whilst we stand in solidarity with the Black experience in America, we want to be able to understand why we stand in solidarity from our own experiences in the UK. So that was this week's lesson, essentially. We hope you enjoyed listening to us. To, I guess, build on our discussion, we have another interesting reading for you. So it will be on the learning grid that you can just click on the link and access the reading in PDF format. I really genuinely enjoyed reading your responses last week, so I'm looking forward to reading your responses again this week. If also there's anything else you want to comment on in regard to what we've discussed today, any part of any issues that we've talked about today that you also want to comment on, please do so as well on the stream on Google Classroom. And also just want to say a really big thank you to Heaven and Giovanna for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.